I will decide whether I will support you, Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you, Madam Deputy. In this session, we are debating Hong Kong's housing and land issues. People have basic needs, including housing. But apart from that, in recent years, we are also concerned about education, medical and health, and also social welfare. Many non-establishment camp members said to the administration in this session why they did not give more resources to medical and health, social welfare and education and so on and so forth, but rather you spend money on white elephants. In this Actually, we will be spending $557.9 billion as a government this year. $78.9 billion or 14% would be spent on education, and then 16.5% on social welfare and 113.7% on medical. And that would already spend half of the government's budget for this year. And as I was talking about these different areas of work, well, if you can look around to European countries, if you do not have medical insurance, it will not be possible for you to see a doctor. I think we have done quite well in these areas. And then coming to housing and land, we're talking about clothing. Of course, we wear clothing to keep warm and to be good looking. I think we're all quite good looking, and we are a gourmet's heaven. We have such a great array of food to choose from, including fish balls on the street side. And talking about traffic and transport, we are well connected with the mainland and every part of the world. So those are not problems. And therefore, it boils down to just housing. Over 200,000 people are in subdivided units, and 300,000 are queuing up for public rental housing. I don't think I need to say more about property prices and rent. As you know, it costs you $10 million to buy a flat of 200 square feet. I did some questionnaire survey. Over 90% of people told me that they were most concerned about housing and land problems in Hong Kong. Now, how should we resolve this problem? Housing boils down on land, and this is the main line of the debate, and also the PA this time around. The administration talks about land title tomorrow. Many non-establishment camp members said we shouldn't go for reclamation, we should rather resume land. They say reclamation is like draining our fiscal reserves by throwing money into the sea. I'd like to talk to our young people here. Those who are aged like me will know that most of the land in Hong Kong has been reclaimed, and that is a quarter of the land that we have. We have 2 million people who are living on reclaimed land, meaning 7,000 hectares. Without reclaimed land, where will these 2 million people be? I'd like to ask our non-establishment camp friends, do you live in a cave? In 1985, and in the 15 years after that, 3,000 hectares were reclaimed, or 200 every year. From 2000 to 2015, 690 hectares, or 40 hectares per year. And the difference between those years will be that we reclaimed only 1/5 of what we used to, and I have found some interesting figures. This chart shows our property prices. In the year 2000, that is when we started to reclaim 80% less land, the index was 100. By 2018, property price index went up by 400 times. At that time, a flat used to cost 2 million, now it costs 8 million, or 4 times. Why did the SAR government not reclaim land in this past period? I think we should pose that question. I cannot answer it on your behalf. Many people have said, and they have put forward arguments, and I would like to share these with you. They say you are putting money into the sea because reclamation would cost 500 billion to 1,000 billion, and the administration is saying out of 1,700 hectares, they would go for 1,000 hectares first. And water at Khao Yi Chau is about 6.5 meters deep, and it would cost $1,300 per foot, and so it would be about $130 billion. And fortunately, 38 academics did the sum for us. They say that out of the 1,000 hectares, we can build 150,000 to 260,000 units, and commercial space will be in the tune of 4 million square meters. And if the ratio is 7 to 3, and you can sell about 45,000 to 78,000 units in the commercial sector, and you can get back 180 to 300 billion dollars. So altogether, you can get back 500 to 700 billion dollars, including the sale of land. So we are going to make a profit out of this. Some people say that reclamation would cost 500 to 1,000 billion dollars because they also factor in infrastructure and hospitals. But if you go for resumption of brownfield sites, you also need to spend money. You're not comparing like with like. And if you talk about dumping money into the sea, you are not convincing. If you don't reclaim land, we will end up with nothing. If we don't reclaim land, nobody will be going there except Mr. Stephen Ho, because his sector would be going around in the waters of Hong Kong. So I would not agree that we are dumping money into the sea. Some people say we should get back the brownfield sites first. But let me emphasize one thing. There is no conflict between the two. It is not a zero-sum game. You can go in parallel by doing those two things together. No one is telling you that by having reclamation, we are not going to resume the brownfield sites. But if you only go for brownfield sites, I will tell you what will happen. Kutong North and Fanling North would be new development areas. There will be first population intake only in 2023, but the development started in 2008. What are we talking about? But this is in NT Northeast. Mr. Eddie Chu, are you here? What were you doing when we started to develop NT Northeast? You were in the forefront, saying that there should not be any removal of residents. And now you say we should not reclaim land from the sea, and you ask us to go for brownfield sites. And then when we go for brownfield sites, are you going to tell us that we should not remove anybody? Then what about those who are in SDUs and who are in the queue for PRH? You create the conflicts, you create the contradictions, and then you go out and rake in the votes. I think I tend to agree with you now, Mr. LEUNG Chi-wai. Some people talk about natural disasters and also the Chinese white dolphins. Some professionals say that the breakwater should be as tall as 12.5 meters, but the water is only 6.5 meters deep or 20 feet. During a typhoon, there will be high waves, of course, but how high will the waves be? The professionals should know. The crest of the wave would only reach 2/3 of the water surface. It must be linked to the water surface. If the water depth is only 6.5 meters, the waves would only rise to about 4 meters. Why do you want the breakwater to be as tall as 12.5 meters? I don't understand. And the administration is consulting on a breakwater of 2 meters high. As for porpoise and Chinese white dolphins, they used to swim in Tuen Mun and North Lantau, but not near Khao Yi Chau. And porpoises usually have their range in southern Cheung Chao and not in this area. So environmentalists can rest assured, and if you don't trust me, you please go and look at some dolphin reports. You say we are going to buy sea sand from the mainland, but of course reclamation will cost money. But in some place, reclamation is not costly. In Hong Kong, we turn out 15 million tons of construction waste every year. Starting from 2001, we have moved them to Taishan in Guangdong province, and we have already created 600 hectares of land for them, and yet we are also paying for the shipping cost. Why don't we go for reclamation and use the construction waste in Hong Kong ourselves? Some people say 150 people come on one-way permit every day, and they are taking up space in Hong Kong. And they say by 2066 population will shrink, and so we do not need so much land.
Well, each of us only occupy 160 square foot, but Singapore 270. So we are 40% lower than the standards when it comes to the per capita living space. So it's a matter of 40% and 6%, even when we have our plans implemented in the future. Are we all having adequate and good enough living space? Is it not a sort of improvement if we can allow each person more living space? And then for the 150 people coming to Hong Kong on a one-way permit, well, I was born in Hong Kong, but then my father was brought to Hong Kong at the age of 4 by our grandfather in Shanghai. So either you were born in the mainland, or your parents or your grandparents were born on the mainland. Now, if we stop people from coming here for family reunion, do you think it is really something that you genuinely believe in? And what about population size? Well, Mr. Leung, well, in fact, one day I'll become 60 years old. And if we haven't got an adequate labor force who do the job for us, the population is aging. Now, I have got this Professor Kwan trying to expose the myth of East Lantau metropolis. It was said that we can house 2.2 million instead of 1.1 million people. Well, 1,000 hectares of land, 2.2 million people. Do you know about the population density involved? It would mean 200,000 people on 1 kilometer square. Now, for the 2030 plus study, even for the most crowded area is Tin Shui Wai, and the density ratio is 90,000. Of course, you can squeeze 4 million or 8 million people into 1 square kilometer, but is it acceptable? I find all the arguments very odd. Attitude. All along, he's been saying that the pro-establishment camp members cannot sort of convince the primary school students. Well, for those who have some degree of wisdom, the majority of the Hong Kongers would know what we are doing. Mr. Leung Ji-chung. Thank you, Madam Deputy. In the first session, I talked about reclamation from the economic perspective. Now I try to address the issue from another point of view. I'd like to talk about the living space per person and then argue about the merit of reclamation. Mr. Tony Chair moved a motion during the previous term of the LegCo concerning the average living space per person. I think it is 50 meters square, so around about 150 square foot per person. Now, of course, you understand that it's quite a sort of small place, so 1 bedroom plus a living room and not much left for movements. Well, in Hong Kong, when we were young, We always said that we could treat a friend to a dinner, but we can't allow somebody to stay with us and spend the night in our flat. That is, we cannot entertain the request that somebody comes to stay with us. So for many decades, our living space is limited. This is because Hong Kong is a small place. We don't have sufficient land for building. Now, in the policy address, we have got a very significant vision, namely the construction of artificial islands near Kao Yi Chao. The total amount of land generated will be 1,700 hectares. And then Michael Wong, the secretary, told us that 1.1 million people will be accommodated there. Probably it will be spread over 30, 40 years before all the flats will be taken up. But in this way, we can solve the problem of overcrowding living space. Well, if we look at the matter on such a long-term basis, then perhaps for the new development areas, we should revise the planning standard. Take Hon Starry Lee as an example. We're supposed to house 170 people there. But what about the size of the flat? I don't think the size of the land is large. It's just over 100 hectares of land. I believe that you have been working on the current living space standard. In other words, 15 square meters per person. Now you can come up with the number of people to be housed there, namely 170,000. In other words, the planning is such that we still maintain the very sort of crowded living space standards. So can we apply the vision to Hon Starry Lee? In other words, please don't house so many people in Hon Starry Lee. Well, I understand that we have a shortfall of 460,000 flats, both in the public and the private sectors. Well, by having the reclamation, then we will surely be able to meet the shortfall, or we will have surplus housing units. Well, in this case, perhaps the administration should come to a proper planning ratio. There should be some adjustments, and I don't think it should still be 50 meters square per person. I know that for Singapore, the standard is already 30 meters square, if I don't remember incorrectly. I won't go after 30, but what about 20 meters square on average? In this way, it will be better for us, and then we'll be happier. Now, for 1,700 hectares of land to be generated by reclamation near Kao Yi Chao, I think you want to give us a better housing environment, so we should no longer be made to live in such crowded conditions. Eddie Chu would like to argue in both ways. For Hon Starry Lee, he had told the people there that they should ask him for help because he could help them to get in situ re-provisioning. That's what he told the brownfield site operators. Someone told me about this. Someone quoted this for my reference. So is it really the case that brownfield site is an easier option than reclamation? I agree with the government. We should adopt a multi-pronged approach. We shouldn't just single out any one of the options like the golf course, brownfield sites, agricultural land, or reclamation. Now, the latest policies of the government are such that for the new development areas, when it comes to land resumption, Grade A land will be the standard to be applied. Well, in this case, Hong Shui-kiu landowners will become rich people. I think they used to get the land at the rate of $200 or $300. Recently, I think the offer has been raised to $1,000 per square foot. Now, of course, we would say that government should resume agricultural land, but who's going to make a gain? Would it be the landowner or people who are buying the land at this moment? I think the government should reconsider its land resumption policy. It doesn't matter if some people become rich as a result, but if we allow people to abuse the loopholes of the policies and become rich, then it is not normal. It is not legitimate. You are being sort of overly generous. Why should we ask for resumption of agricultural land? Now, the government is saying that we need 1,200 hectares of land, and we need to house 460,000 people. And then that's on the basis of per capita floor area of 150 square foot, and I won't accept that. Now, their argument is such that by resuming agricultural land, then there will be sufficient land, and there's no need for reclamation. They say that take back the brownfield sites, resume agricultural land, take back the Fanning Golf Course. Of course, Mr. Xiu has already said that that would take us more than a decade's time. But what worries me most is that would this accidentally allow some people to become rich? I think it is a legitimate suspicion. Now, for reclamation, it is not going to harm anybody. How come that there are still a lot of people objecting to it? Probably the only party to be affected will be the marine environment. And then Mr. Stephen Ho may criticize me for saying yes before we find a solution. If we know all the details, if we know all the arguments and still somebody is objecting to it, then I don't think it is on the ground of not harming the interests of future generations. I'm afraid there's an ulterior motive. If you take back the agricultural land, the Fanning Golf Course, if you resume the brownfield sites, if we are not able to enhance the per capita floor area of accommodation, which is currently 150 square foot, then I think we need to expose the truth. When you fight for this arrangement, are you related to the interests of the developers? Are you sort of involved in the interests of the agricultural landowners? Well, I think this is a very important element when we engage in this land debate. If you have a vested interest and then you help to persuade the government to go one way or other, then it is not good, and I urge the public to understand more clearly about the position of such politicians. And I think that at the same time, we need to revisit our housing policy. That is, perhaps it calls for a reform so that we can have adequate housing. The current living conditions are poor, and then as a result of the lack of land, we don't have sufficient services, say for example, childcare centers. The shortfall is indeed alarming. In Hong Kong as a whole, for those aged between 0 and 3, we have only got 700 places in the childcare centers. I don't think it is adequate at all. Therefore, I would suggest that when we plan for the new towns, for the new development areas, Mr. Michael Wong, make sure that you will set aside more resources so as to increase the number of such childcare centers so that young couples can continue to work and they can continue to contribute to the economy of Hong Kong. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Mr. Junius Ho. Madam Deputy, on Wednesday, I spoke for the first time. I would like to talk about climate change as well as energy. I want to praise the government for being decisive and the approach of taking matters forward. In particular, for paragraph 277, the administration has introduced a feed-in tariff to provide incentives for individuals and non-government bodies to invest in renewable energy. We will further provide support and facilitation to the private sector, including suitably relaxing the restrictions on installation of solar photovoltaic systems on the rooftops of new territories exempted houses, and making appropriate relaxations for other private buildings, in particular the low-rise ones. In addition, we will introduce a new program to assist schools and NGOs in installing small-scale renewable energy systems. Madam Deputy, so the government has listened to us. The government has got ears to listen to us. However, I think we need to make our case clearer. It's always easy to criticize the government, but while you are taking the government to task, you need to come up with concrete and feasible alternatives or options. I don't think the government would say no to us.
The EMSD, since the 10th of October, has announced the details. That means if you work for it, if you come up with a feasible proposal, if you put in an effort to lobby, if you reach out to stakeholders and get them to work together, you write about it, you list out the details, you quantify the project, then it will be like what paragraph 277 said. I think that the administration is really moving forward. Well, there is the solar photovoltaic systems. I think they have given us sufficient details. They also give us an alternative. If you want to suppress certain abnormalities, on the other hand, you give it another way out. I am talking about municipal waste charging. I have talked to the secretary. I think that the administration should tell the public that they are not using it as an excuse to impose another charge, and we all need to work together. There should be a reward as well as penalty. The acting CS4A is the secretary for the environment. I give him some food for thought. How can we improve the separation of waste system? People might think that you are trying to benefit from it. Some people will think that, well, if you charge me for plastic bag, I will put the waste in to the waste separation bins. I take my son to show him what civic duties are. So can the waste separation system encourage people to participate? On one hand, you impose a charge. You will have to, on the other hand, encourage people to change their behavior. This is stick and carrot. If you rely on only one bureau, how many advertisements you will have to take out? We have 12,000 owners corporations. Well, if you want to set up an OC, you will have to get an approval from the Secretary for Home Affairs. How can you get the OC to be involved? This is about tripartite interaction. So we have participation of the sector, the public, and the government. If we can do it through incorporated owners, people might think, if I to impose a charge, why do I have to pay for the bin liners? If Mr. Lau will give them a subsidy, and then at the same time they take their children to separate waste, it's just like a 2-year scheme. If you meet the target, I will give you free of charge the bin liners. You can draw reference from something that worked well. Say, for example, you ask the trade to change the engine of diesel vehicles. If you phase out your vehicle, you will get money in return. If you can get the owners corporation to be involved, and then if you beautify the waste separation system, so you reduce waste, and at the same time there will be recycling, and there is an incentive, we will be able to see the result. It only cost a limited amount. Yesterday, a lot of the opposition camp only wants to criticize. They criticize everything. They only point out problems. They are fear-mongering to stop you from moving ahead. As an official, as a leader, I have to set an example. I have to be committed. You can't just criticize. It's easy to point a finger at someone, but if you come up with a solution, you will succeed. It's easy to destroy. I thank Mr. Wang Kam-sing and Mr. Michael Wong. I remember starting from May in relation to the photovoltaic panels, and at the beginning of March this year, I had a meal with the chief executive who said this is a good idea. She said, "Juniors, if you can show me public support, we will be able to do it." And I said, before 30th of May, I'll get 2,000 signatures. And I have obtained about 3,200 signatures. And I forwarded to your bureau. Mr. Michael Wong looked at it, and he said it is unreasonable to have height restriction of 2.5 meters because it's a waste of space. We have limited land. It's easy to criticize, but do you have the courage to walk the walk? Do you have the wisdom to come up with a feasible solution? If there is a will, there is a way. You can't remain aloof. You're an honorable member, but you have to show that you're honorable and you are here to serve the public. That's not the job of the government. This is about cooperation and solidarity. I support it. I give it 99 points out of 100. There is still some room for improvement. Thank you. Mr. Man Chen. I would like to talk about transport. First, the diversion of traffic using over the 3 tunnels. This is something that the administration will have to do as soon as possible, because in the end the Western Tunnel will go back to the government. And there is now uneven distribution, and the problem is serious. Even if we don't start the diversion arrangement now, it will have to be done in the future. There are many ways to go about it. Well, at this time for Cross Harbour Tunnel and Eastern Tunnel, the toll will increase, whereas that for Western Tunnel will drop. Well, for Western Tunnel, it will be dropped by $20 from 70 to 50. And at the same time, there will be an increase of $20 toll for Cross Harbour Tunnel from 20 to 40. That's double. It's 100% increase. Users of Cross Harbour Tunnel will find it unpalatable. At the same time, for Eastern Tunnel, the current toll is $25. It will increase to 40. It's a huge increase. Quite shocking indeed. The administration's general policy is to discourage road transport. The public is encouraged to use public transport. Utilization rate of public transportation in Hong Kong is the highest. So 90% of commuters use public transport. So when people use private cars, that means there is a genuine need. It's not the case that we discourage you to drive. It's not right to demonize private car users. Well, this time it's just 3 tunnels. That's not enough. You have to also include Tai Lam Tunnel. That's part of the western side. It's now $44. Western Tunnel $70. It will cost you a return journey about over $200. So I think Tai Lam Tunnel should be incorporated into the diversion scheme, so that people living in North District can use Tai Lam, and then Western Tunnel instead of Eastern or West or Cross Harbour Tunnel. We propose that there will be different toll levels for peak and non-peak time to reduce the extent of the increase, or perhaps all 3 tunnels will charge $30. Perhaps you will reduce the rate of increase of Cross Harbour Tunnel and Eastern Tunnel, whereas the Western Tunnel, the toll will be reduced from 70 to 50. We asked for information. The administration said that they have done some computer simulation. Of course, we have to believe that, but not entirely, because if you rely solely on the computer simulation, you'll find that sometimes reality is somewhat different. So you have to give us more than one choice. Well, franchise buses will receive full subsidy for tunnel tolls. We think that under the diversion arrangement, it should not be bundled with subsidy to franchised buses, because public transportation is the mode of transport encouraged by the administration. It's the duty of the administration to take forward this plan. Tongchong people, they want to see the charge for the Chengyi Lantau line to be abolished. Well, most of the roads in Hong Kong is toll-free, save and except this one, that is the Lantau link. So how come that you will have to pay to use Lantau link? For the central Wan Chai bypass, you don't have to pay. I think that the administration has already covered $4.4 billion cost for the Lantau link. So the fees should be abolished.
Second, parking. The administration said you would increase parking space, but you are moving at a snail's pace. I am really very concerned about park and ride. I hope there will be automatic parking systems so we can provide more spaces. I'm also very concerned about Hong Kong planning standards and guidelines. In 2016, when this term started, I moved a motion to revise the Hong Kong PSG. But 2 years have passed, the TH Bureau and the Development Bureau, none of you have triggered that adjustment. There are many unreasonable clauses in the Hong Kong PSG saying if an estate is built as a superstructure on an MTR station, the parking spaces are only provided at 70%, but we should exactly be providing spaces for park and ride, so it's very unreasonable. Then I'd like to talk about sea transport. We understand that you will be introducing water taxis and you are going to revive the Hong Kong Central ferry route. I support that, but I'm aware that ferries are expensive. We cancelled that route because it was a huge deficit. Tens of millions every year was lost. I'd like to ask you how you propose to make it sustainable this time around. We of course hope that you can do more for ferries. For example, the biggest expenditure is fuel maintenance and manpower cost. You are willing to shoulder the maintenance cost, but what about the fuel? Many ferry companies are using very old ferries. They have been used for decades. Some ferry companies are introducing carbon fiber, mixed fuel, and low energy consumption ferries. When they come into Hong Kong, we do not have onshore electricity. When we promote water taxis, and when we want to operate more ferry routes, can we also provide onshore electricity so they will go for new type ferries? We were helping vehicles that turned to using higher generation diesel. So why don't we also provide onshore electricity so we have newer ferries? Hong Kong's air is polluted mainly because of seaborne activities. If we can replace the old ferry fleet, Hong Kong's air will be better. Secondly, there are some unreasonable government charges. There is this boarding fee. When we go to Macau or Zhuhai, we would take ferries, and you pay a fee, which is a boarding fee. If you go to Macau or Zhuhai by ferry, you are charged $11. Like in Macau, people have already abolished it because it's a tax. Some residents may use the land route, and they don't have to pay this fee. But if you take a ferry, you have to pay this fee. With the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, I believe you should abolish that fee, which is $11. Sounds like a small amount, but it adds to the ticket fee. And this will hurt the competitiveness of ferries, and it may affect the desire to continue the operation. Ferries, I believe, will remain attractive. Some people do prefer ferries, and we actually want them to operate more routes. Even with the development in Greater Bay Area, we believe we will need these ferries. So even if we have the bridge, you should consider canceling the boarding fee. So ticket fees can be adjusted, and so ferries will continue to be viable. We don't want some ferries to be cut. Some people who want to be on the dot, who want to be punctual, love to take ferries. I hope you will consider canceling that fee. Mr. Kwok Wai-kang? Thank you, Madam Deputy. Talking about a livable city, we must look at the livability index. In 2018, The Economist ranked Hong Kong 35th out of 140, higher than Singapore and Beijing and Shanghai. And in Asia, we are among the top 3, just next to Osaka and Tokyo. And what were considered social stability, security, education, infrastructure, medical and health, etc. You may think that everything is thriving in Hong Kong and people must be very happy and feel they are blessed and people should want to move here. But is that the case? Is it that we can remain where we are and so we will have stability and prosperity, that we will not stoop too low? Madam Deputy, let us learn from the Chinese writer Lu Xun. People may give you all the accolades, so you become complacent, and then you would meet your doom. Mr. Wang Qishan, our vice chairman, was in Singapore, and there was an economic forum. A foreigner praised him for being someone who had influence all over the world. And Mr. Wang replied by saying, please do not give me all these accolades. And in fact, everyone should keep a cool head in order to tackle crises so that we can prepare for rainy days. Indeed, is Hong Kong a livable city? Madam Deputy, every Hong Kong person can tell you directly that there is so much pressure living in Hong Kong. Working hours are extremely long. In fact, an international organization showed from survey that Hong Kong has been the place with the highest property prices, which are so unaffordable for a row of 8 years. So people have very unaffordable housing, and indeed that has been the case for a row of 8 years. How can we claim ourselves to be a livable city? And also, we have another index showing how people have become slaves of housing installments. Well, the sampling may not be comprehensive, but to a certain extent, it reflects how Hong Kong people feel towards high property prices. I think property prices have become so expensive, they have crossed the line. I have been collecting information, I'm doing comparisons. In Tin Shui Wai, and in a very big estate, the A small flat with 400 square feet had its price doubled in the past few years, and I'm talking about the sale price. You need $1.56 million just to buy that flat. If you are a double income family, and if you can put aside half of your savings, half of your income as savings, both of you would have to save for 7.5 years before you can have the down payment amount. The tough measures that you have taken could have been very effective short-term measures in order to dampen the desire of speculators. But we have had short supply of housing for a very long time, and speculators were able to transfer all the cost of the tough measures onto local final users and home starters. The tough measures brought in money for our treasury. So did it come from speculators, or actually it had been shouldered by the final users? And you must answer that question. Madam Deputy, in today's Hong Kong, we have a long queue for public housing. The PRH queue means people have to wait 5.3 years. I'm sure that figure is going to go up. There are 270,000 waiting for public housing. And what about the new HOS? The prices have been too high, so the CE has introduced what the FTU has been proposing, and that is to calculate prices according to the affordability of the users. And therefore, we have a discount of 48%, meaning it's selling at 52%, and that is why 270,000 people applied. There are only 4,400 units, meaning 136 people are fighting for one unit. And there are 210,000 people who are inadequately housed, meaning they are in subdivided units. They suffer under high rent, and the unscrupulous owners are charging them hefty water and electricity tariffs. Madam Deputy, housing is a problem that plagues Hong Kong people. Some people say we can go for developing farmland and brownfield sites to tackle the problem. As many colleagues explained, maybe you can do something to address the need for the next 10 to 15 years. What about 20 years down the road? You need to make the strategy now. Even if you go for reclamation, it takes a long time. If you don't get started now, I'm afraid it would be too late. Madam Deputy, recently property prices eased somewhat, but if it's just 10–20%, we're just going back to the levels in 2016, 2017. At that time, we already thought that that was the peak. Nobody foresaw that it went even higher in 2018. If some people think that this small adjustment has been achieved by government measures, I would say that we should be careful not to misinterpret this phenomenon. In the PA, well, finally, trade unions have been heeded, and the ratio between public-private housing would be adjusted from 6:4 to 7:3. And a few private housing land pieces have been shifted for public housing, and that is appreciated. But these are only short-term measures. Starting from 2015, we have a new long-term housing strategy, and in the last 3 years, you should have provided 280,000 public housing, including PRH and HOS, but you're only achieving half of the target on average annually. We are still very far away from the target. People would ask, even if you adjust the ratio, how can you achieve the target? If there will be no land in order to achieve the 7:3 ratio, I'm afraid that this would be good only on paper. And our dream of solving the housing problem will disappear. I'd like to talk about redevelopment. In 2012, you announced redevelopment of Wafu Estate, we already said at that time that you must also consider a timetable for redeveloping 22 estates. Recently, at the Housing Authority brainstorming session, there will be a redevelopment wave. Very often, redevelopment takes 5 to 10 years. If there will be a duplication of different redevelopment waves, the HA will not be able to cope. Therefore, you have to make your plans early. And then HOS. Now, they are sold at 52% discount, and people would love to embrace it. But there will just be 26,000 subsidized sale units in the next 5 years, or fewer than 6,000 every year. However, the target should be 8,000, so again, you're not achieving it. If you want to deliver your promise, if you want to achieve these targets, you have to work harder. Don't make people, or don't give people the impression that you are just talking the talk. Lastly, can I turn to the environment? Well, it has a very wide scope, and I don't know where to start, but let me talk about a few points. First, now we have more occasions of extreme weather. In low-lying areas and along the coast, we are more prone to swells. We believe the administration must do more. The Development Bureau is studying into the issue, but you have to hasten your pace. The climate is not going to wait for you. They won't say, you take 2 years, I will wait 2 years before I give you a typhoon. And as you know, the storm season is coming along very soon, but you are going to take 18 to 30 months for your study.
Every time when there is a typhoon, marine refuse is being washed ashore. Well, like in the case of Hang Fai-chin, I was surprised by an official who told me that the refuse washed ashore would then be the responsibility of that particular private residential development. But in fact, the refuse was originally in the waters, and it should be the government that should take care of it. So I think it is absurd to give such a response. So make sure that you clean up the marine refuse. And then a word about the Charter on external lighting. We doubted the effectiveness of the Charter 2 years ago. As I have always said, to primary school students, secondary school students, yes, you can give them a carrot, but not so for the business sector. Now, for others who have been given awards, well, they have already made enough money, and therefore they were willing to take your advice. At the district level, we have talked to individual shops, and I've said that after you have closed, there's no need to switch on all the lights because you are harming others' interests, because the glare would make people sleepless. But then they said they would still want to have the promotional effect. Now, of course, nowadays they have tried to switch off the lights by about 10:30. Of course, I don't know whether it is good enough. I hope that we can legislate for the arrangements. Currently, people don't know who to turn to. At this moment, the EPD would tell you that there's nothing it can do. If the charter is not to be signed by the relevant business operators, there's nothing the EPD can do. And then I want to talk about the charging scheme for waste disposal. The LEUNG went on an overseas duty visit during the previous term, and we all agreed that we lagged behind other cities in terms of waste management. Many environmental protection measures have been implemented by other cities a long time ago. We have to catch up, and we have to do so very quickly. Well, for the waste disposal charging scheme, I think probably the government would like to recover the cost. Well, citizens told me that It's not that they don't want to cut down on the waste, but then there are a few problems. First of all, you know that during Lunar New Year you receive a box of chocolates, and then the packaging is so excessive that you find it a problem. And even when you buy a bunch of bananas, in the past you just got the bananas. Nowadays they come with a plastic tray. So if you want to eat the bananas, you have no choice but to get the plastic waste as well. So I think it all boils down to cutting waste at source, and we should recycle the recyclable materials, and then people would sort of take it more easily instead of having it imposed on them. Now people are criticizing the scheme. It's not easy for them to sort their waste, and they have no choice when they get their groceries from the shops with so much packaging. So they find it difficult to understand. They don't know how they can cut down on the waste further. In Taiwan and in Japan, of course, they've implemented a waste charging scheme for a long time, but then they are more detailed in terms of waste sorting and waste recycling. So make sure that you do more for the citizens so that the public will be convinced that they are not being penalized for generating waste. Now many people have the feeling that, oh no, I can't help it unless I don't eat anything. Otherwise there will certainly be an amount of waste to be generated. And then when we talk about our vision, is there a place where everybody would like to go there to live? Every city has its own problems to resolve. A while ago, members talked about whether they would support the reclamation or not. In a debate competition, usually we'll be asked to tell whether for a particular issue there are more advantages than disadvantages. Then students will try to do some counting. 5 advantages or 5 merits and then 3 demerits. I don't think we should approach the matter with such a mindset. It's not a matter of quantifying the merits and demerits. We should look at the long-term results. It's a simple matter. If we don't embark on reclamation today, the land debate in the future would be even more complicated and more controversial. If we can rely on reclamation to resolve the problem of land shortage, then the division in the society, the arguments in the society will be minimized. And in this way, that's the greatest advantage and is the best for public interest. So please set aside such arguments. Please try to look for solutions. Of course, the society as a whole has to pay a price for it. There is a cost that we have to pay. But then if we can do a proper job of environmental impact assessment, then the impacts can be mitigated. That's far better than criticizing the government for this vision. Now the government is trying to embark on a very important task, that is to plan for land supply for the next 20 years. If you oppose it, it means that you just want to prolong the arguments, the criticisms, and you try to survive on the basis of the negative forces in your society. Mr. Ted Hui. Just now, Mr. KWOK Ka-ki has said that it's best if we can reduce the arguments or the controversies. Of course, I buy his idea, but who started it? I have to be fair to everybody, and I have to repeat my comments. For the artificial islands, well, it is supposed to be a town planning issue. However, of course, it is about land supply, town planning, housing, and the use of public resources, the distribution or allocation of public resources, and it affects our future in the coming decades. It is also a structural issue involving many challenges and difficulties. I have to make my position clear. I can never bring myself to agree to the government's position that is, without thorough discussion, you are going to splash $100 billion on the construction of the artificial islands. Well, as far as housing and land are concerned, we need to be very prudent, and we have to look at the figures in great details. Well, I'm making this point because we understand that when it comes to land policies, there are just so many examples to show that the government has a black box operation. They would never disclose everything to us. They withhold the data from us. First of all, the public as well as the media have asked for more information about the shortage of 1,200 hectares of land. Now, for the task force on land supply, it is said that we need reclamation for 1,200 hectares of land. For this magnitude of the shortfall, as far as the Hong Kong 2030 Plus study is concerned, I think the department itself could not dispel our doubts. We don't know why we need 130. We have 130 hectares of land in the form of sewage plant, and why is it that we are given the overall figure of 1,200 hectares of land? I think the arguments are not clear. And then for the brownfield sites as well as the operations they run, well, the Democrats opposed reclamation. We said, please go to the brownfield sites. Now the government has dismissed the idea, saying that it is very difficult to do so. But then the government had yet to finish the study on brownfield sites and its operations. So the government is being self-contradictory. And then for short-term tenancy sites, again, they are unknown to us. The land department has granted the tenancies to the applicants. Now in Hong Kong Island, there's a site of 80,000 square foot, and then it will be leased to the Six Tong family for 75 years. The lands department doesn't have to justify the case. Whenever we try to ask the lands department for the details about payment of land premium, when the lease will be modified, and how the premium will be calculated, they would just talk about the procedures, but then they would never justify their case and give us a detailed figure about the money involved. Now, we want to look at the mechanism. We have simply been told that the Seeing Council makes a decision. If they say it is fine, then it is fine. So it gives people the impression that for land-related controversies and also the allocation of land, I'm afraid we cannot dispel the suspicion that commercial reasons are involved, and then property developers have been able to influence the government. Now, certain people take part in the Executive Council discussion. There are people who have helped the CE when she ran for the post. It seems that such people are able to sway the opinion. As far as town planning is concerned, what about members appointed to sit on the town planning board? They have all been appointed by the government. And then for the Executive Council, the functional constituency, the task force on land supply, as well as the land advisory committee, all of them are sort of related. That's why there is a lack of transparency on land matters. And then recently a paper has been sort of declassified. And in fact, it was in 1986, Gordon Wu who first mooted the idea of having an artificial island built. And then the British Hong Kong government rejected the idea, saying that it's too massive. Now, Gordon Wu has also said that Sichtong asked him for a solution to the housing problem in Hong Kong. So Sichtong and Gordon Wu made a suggestion, and then the CE would forget about the task force on land supply. And then, so who's the CE? Is our Hong Kong Foundation doing the work of the Secretary for Development on his behalf. Now, if it is an option, having input from the property developers, then I just wonder if they are merely protecting the interests of the property developers. Should we count on them to give us advice to resolve the housing issue? I'm afraid this approach would only mean that housing becomes a commodity and the property prices would just skyrocket. And then I want to say that when we increase land supply, does it at the same time means that the property prices can be suppressed so that people can buy a property?
Let's look at the time after reunification. The Hong Kong SAR government rationalized the move to get in bed with developers. From 85,000 units to many other initiatives, they said that by increasing land supply and building land reserve, it will effectively keep property prices down. So that has become the selling point of artificial island. It sounds feasible, but is it that simple? I'm going to explain. From the experience we have after reunification, well, land supply is heavily intertwined with property prices. However, increasing land supply, will it effectively curb property prices hike? I have two documents with me. One is the Metropolis Plan of the colonial government about reclamation at West Kowloon and the repositioning of the Hong Kong airport and other issues. From the reclamation, Kowloon will be expanded by 1/3. This is to promote Hong Kong's position in terms of tourism, financial services, business, trade. This will improve community facilities. It is rather forward-looking. Now, let's look at the time between 1985 to year 2000. We have reclaimed over 3,000 hectares. Property prices in Hong Kong, apart from the financial tsunami in 2000 when they dropped to SARS level in 2003, they have never stayed low. And previously there was a saying that if we build land reserve, it will affect property market and increase the influence of the administration. Now we have a discussion paper on reclamation back in the 1990s. One of the paragraphs said that there were people who criticized that excessive reclamation will create an oversupply of land, property market will shrink. However, the building of land reserve for future land use in a prudent way is a different policy. This policy is to provide sufficient land for different uses. So even if you had land reserves, you have to take into account demand in the market and release the land accordingly. In the end, it will be buyers who take the lead. If you want to use land sale to increase the government's influence, is it an effective way? I doubt it. Under the land sales program approach, Well, the pace of releasing land for sale in the market is rather slow. So it can't effectively affect property prices. In high-tech new development, we have seen record high prices. In 2013, that a press said that there was land for 340 hectares of land available in 2013. However, a very long time later, there is still over 100 hectares of land that is not being put to use. So by building land reserve, increasing land supply, do you think it will effectively affect property prices? There is no direct correlation. No one can prove it. Under the land sharing program, the target is to get developers to release land reserve as soon as possible. As a result, housing supply will be decided by developers. Madam Deputy, when we talk about housing, the Chief Executive, Mrs. Carrie Lam, tried to not intervene in the property market. She announced special rates targeting vacant units to get developers to make available unsold flats as soon as possible. That is only a token. What about transitional housing that will help 90,000 households living in subdivided flats? They don't do it. They ask the Hong Kong CSS to do it. They ask NGOs to do it. I can see how much they care about those living in subdivided flats. It seems that they sound louder than their action. There is also the Bohemia Foundation. Well, they said that there should be something done about the green farm housing. It seems that there are many tricks. Well, it is the Hong Kong Foundation, but the government doesn't do anything concrete. So, do you think that when it comes to reclamation, they will not keel towards the demand of developers? The loyalists said that you keep opposing to everything. Why don't you come up with a solution? But if we have to abide by procedural justice, shouldn't we wait for the final report of Task Force on Land Supply before we try to forge consensus? The loyalists said that Democrats blindly opposed to everything. Let me remind them that they are the coalition in power after reunification. They control the EXCO. They control over half of the seats here. The problems are still here at the same time. Isn't it the case that they would rather cooperate with developers instead of helping Hong Kong people? You support artificial island. But what about those living in subdivided flats? What about youngsters who can't buy their own flats? What about old people who are waiting for a place in a home? Hong Kong people know there is idle land, there is military sites. They have never lost a case in land's resumption ordinance. They don't want to use it. What Hong Kong people can see is that is the blind support by loyalists. Well, Hong Kong people suffer a loss. It cannot be compensated by all the free meals loyalists give them. We should not let such regressive views to decide our future. When everyone's talking about conservation, energy conservation, and conservation, we have to protect our environment. if we want to protect and invest in our future, we have to go along the line of environmental protection. But still, you can see that for the artificial island, it's still the mentality of developing for the economy. That's why one Kam-sing will have to give way to Michael Wong. You claim that development should go side by side with conservation. But I see something different. I see a very backward mentality. There will be a huge cost on the environment and to the society if you go ahead with reclamation. I would now like to move on to whether it's value for money and whether it fits the needs of Hong Kong in the future. PPP is problematic. We have the Hong Kong-Macau Bridge, we have the XRL, there is project cost overrun, ineffective management, we have a spate of incidents, we have M+ museum. We see that one of the contractors become insolvent, the government will have to take over. Many mistakes were made after the infrastructural projects are commissioned. We see them being underutilized. It seems that the administration does not want to improve and learn from mistake. Instead, they try to sell the artificial island project, which is the most expensive in the history of Hong Kong. I think they have put the cart before the horse. With many construction projects in the pipeline, it exerts pressure on the construction sector. According to a study paper, it says there are 5 challenges faced by the sector. 3 of them is related to the artificial islands. Say, for example, complicated large-scale infrastructural projects, construction site safety and manpower shortage. Between 2010 and 2017, skilled workers in the construction sector has increased from the average age is 48.7, now it's increased to 51.4. That is a problem. And they say that there is recruitment problems when it comes to attracting new blood. There are problems with PPP. If you add more large-scale infrastructure project in the pipeline, can you imagine the pressure faced by the sector? If these projects don't get the trust of Hong Kong people, I think it will only add more problems to the sector. These projects are high risk, and it's not the case that we don't have enough land. It's uneven distribution. The administration needs to focus on resources allocation. Blindly creating land is a very poor approach. Another problem with the artificial island is that they only focus on economic integration with a Pearl River Delta. Well, in the 1990s and subsequent programs, there are goals set to integrate with and cooperate with Pearl River Delta. So in the 1990s and 2018, the cooperation approach should be different. We should not just focus on economic development. We do need to pay attention to environmental issues and how it affects Hong Kong. We don't need the artificial island. We need to tackle climate changes as well as environmental problems. We need to take into account the cost we pay in terms for the damage we do to the environment. There is food, air quality, water quality problem in the Pearl River Delta. After Typhoon Mangkhut, in low-lying areas and coastal areas, we do need to have a review about what the administration should do. So, Central Waters is not an ideal location for artificial island. The proposed artificial island will be connected to the Hong Kong island via Green Island. That's an area that, according to a report, that will face a rising sea level. We do need to conserve the environment. That will be our biggest contribution to the Pearl River Delta. This will rekindle hope for Hong Kong. Why will the artificial island be so controversial? After the big debate, we realized that there is land in Hong Kong. However, the administration is scared of those with power and vested interest. The artificial island is compromised. The artificial island is a symbol of unfairness.
I therefore speak today to oppose to the building of the artificial island. Hong Kong must band together to oppose it. This is for the sake of land justice. Thank you. Dr. K.K. Kwok. Madam Deputy, originally I thought I didn't have to talk about